Acts chapter 27 from New King James Version. And when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. So Julius was probably a very popular name, as Julius Caesar was one of the first of the empire, first Caesar. He was actually not the first Caesar because the Senate was still in place at his time, but he kind of started the whole thing. But this is right after Paul had made his defense to Festus and Agrippa, and he had appealed to Caesar, appealed to Rome. But Festus and Agrippa may have set him free, but he said, well, he appealed to Rome, so we've got to send him to Rome, to Caesar, to hear his case. So, and also it says, and when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, is an indication to me that Luke was among the travel party with Paul to Rome. Because at various places in Acts, Luke says we sometimes, and he says they at other points. So maybe Luke's back with him again here. So entering a ship of Adramyttium, I guess that's a town or something. I don't know what this Adramyttium is. We put to sea, meaning to sail along the coast of Asia. Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, was with us. So let me show you a couple things. So this is the map of the trip Paul took to Rome, and it's a little blurry, so it's even blurry on my screen. But he starts in Jerusalem, and he goes Antipatris, Caesarea. I think it takes them a day to get to Sidon, and it'll say that in a minute. Then they sail under the protection of Cyprus. So they go this way because the winds are going to be rushing in, I guess, this way. And Cyprus blocks some of the wind, so they go around the harsh winds and sail along Asia. This is Asia, so they say they sail along Asia. And it's going to mention some of these towns. Rhodes, Cnidus, whatever that is, Salome, Lycia, Fair Havens. And then this is where they get lost for 2 weeks, somewhere in here, being blown around by the wind, and they land on Malta, then go to Cilicia, Rhegium, through that little gap, and then up to Rome. So that's the route they're taking, and it's going to be difficult. And I'm going to show you something else here. This Aristarchus that's mentioned in Acts chapter 27, this is what we just read. But he's also mentioned in Acts 19 and Acts 20, dragging along Gaius and Aristarchus in Acts chapter 19. And he was accompanied by Sopater of Berea and the son of Pyrrhus, and by Aristarchus and Secundus of the Thessalonians. So I don't know anything about this Aristarchus fellow except that he's mentioned 3 times of traveling with Paul in the book of Acts. So picking up from there, and the next day we land at Sidon. We saw that on the map. And Julius treated Paul kindly. Julius is the Roman centurion who's in charge of getting Paul, not only Paul, but all these other people and prisoners to Rome. He treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. And Festus was the guy who turned Paul over to Julius. And Festus probably told Julius that this guy has really not done anything wrong besides make the Jews mad. And we really don't care about that, but he's a Roman and he appealed to Rome, so he's got to go hear his case in Rome. So he obviously said, well, I'm not concerned about this guy. He's a low security risk. So he gave him liberty. I'm sure he didn't give everybody that same liberty. And it said Paul was receiving care, so I don't think that just meant he was socializing. I think that meant maybe he needed medical attention. And maybe that's where he picked up Luke, but Luke already seemed to be with him, and Luke's the physician. So when we had put to sea from there, we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea, which is off Cilicia and Pamphylia, that's in Asia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, and he put us on board. When we had sailed slowly many days, and arrived with difficulty on Cnidus, the wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmone. Sorry. Passing it with difficulty, he came to a place called Fair Havens, near the city of Lasea. So this was the same route that was mentioned on the map. So that map, I think, is just a pretty good indication of the route that they took. It's probably, obviously, not an exact route, especially when they got lost or tossed around, or how they swerved around in the seas, but it hits the high points of where they went. Now when much time had been spent, and sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives. So we're going to find out later, Paul actually gets a revelation concerning this. But right now, Paul is saying, I perceive that this voyage will end in disaster. So Paul's actually wrong. Paul's perception is wrong. Now, yeah, I think we could say it's wrong, because he says it's not only loss of the cargo and ship, but our lives. Now, their lives were spared, but they did lose the ship. But I believe Paul's just speaking from his own earthly perspective, not as a prophet. He's just saying, man, this does not look like a good time to be traveling. The winds are rough, and it was. There's some indication that there was like cyclonic wind, maybe like hurricane type stuff, not just strong winds. We'll get to that in a minute. But Paul's perception here is wrong, and I find that interesting. He's speaking, I think, of his own earthly perspective, and he's wrong. Nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. Now, here's something interesting. This ship was they picked up some ship that was already heading to Rome. So it's not like this was a Roman military ship meant for transporting prisoners. This was just a regular cargo ship. And I'm envisioning something like the pirate ships, or something, large ship with large sails that could hold many people. And because the harbor was not suitable to winter in. Now, this term winter, I do believe that this was in the winter months, because this particular wind that it mentions in a minute is a wind that usually appears only in the autumn and winter months of the year in this region, because I looked that up. But I don't think they were going to park the boat for 3 months and then start again in the spring. So when it says that it wasn't suitable to winter in, I think it just means to stay there for the necessary amount of time for this storm to pass. And it may be a week or two, not 3 months until we change seasons. But because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also. if by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete opening toward the north, the southwest, and the northwest, and winter there. And I think that just means stay until the storm passes. When the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desire. So a south wind is desirable. In the wintertime, if you have a south wind, it's going to be a calm wind, I guess. And then if you get a north wind, it's going to be rough, because in the wintertime, you've got all that cold air rushing down, and it's got more force than the south winds coming up. So they thought they had achieved their desire with the south wind. They put out to sea. They sailed close by Crete, but not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose called Euroclydon. So I searched this word Euroclydon, and it's a real brief statement that says a cyclonic tempestuous wind that usually appears in the Mediterranean Sea in the autumn and winter months. So it's kind of like, El Nino in America off the west coast. Whenever a lot of weird things happen, you've got this El Nino current or whatever that causes some chaos. But the Euroclydon is a tempestuous cyclonic wind in the autumn and winter months in the Mediterranean. So when the ship was caught, and I think it comes out of the north also. So when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive. I guess that means we let Euroclydon drive. We let the wind drive wherever she wanted to go. And running under the shelter of an island called Claudia, we secured the skiff with difficulty. I wanted to see if I could figure out what the skiff is, but a quick search, I couldn't really understand it. It may be the bottom of the boat, because when I looked it up, it talks about a flat bottom boat. Maybe a skiff boat is a flat bottom boat, but I don't think they were in a flat bottom boat. I think they were in a big ship. But they secured the skiff with difficulty. When they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship, and fearing lest they should run aground on the Syrtis sands, they struck sail and so were driven. So some of this is ship language that I don't really understand. And because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day, we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. So Paul had already given his warning, and now after several days, I guess they set sail when they think they've got a favorable wind, but as soon as they get out there, they realize they've messed up, and this tempest wind and waves started beating the ship and tearing it apart, so that they were throwing out anything that they could to lighten the load of the ship so that it would sit higher in the water, be less likely to sink. But it says all hope was finally lost, which means the centurion and the ship captain probably also realized that they were in serious trouble. But after long abstinence from food, now there was a mention a little bit earlier about a fast, and I don't know exactly which fast that's talking about. If it's just talking about something that Paul was doing as a Jew. Now, the winter, I don't know if there was a fast associated with the winter Jewish feast days. They're really celebration days, not days of mourning. Well, no, I remember the Day of Atonement. I think they did have a fast associated with the Day of Atonement. Because that was the day when they actually focused on their sins and the need for atonement. So maybe it's the Day of Atonement, Jewish feast day, that this chapter overlaps with, because it's a winter month, it's an autumn-fall season, and the fast indicates a Jewish feast day. Then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Men, you should have listened to me, and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who will sail with you. Therefore take heart, men. For I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. So now Paul adjusts his previous warning with God's advice, not just his own personal human advice. And he says, we're all going to live, but we're going to lose the ship. Now when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight, the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land. I don't know how you sense you're drawing near land. I guess you can hear different noises, or I don't know. I don't know how far away they were. It tells, but I don't know how far a fathom is. Maybe I'll look it up. And they took soundings. I wonder how they took soundings also at this time. It would be interesting to investigate the technology that they had for taking soundings, and found it to be 20 fathoms. That's how far the land was away. And when they had gone a little farther, they took soundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern. Now, the stern is the back of the boat. I looked this up to confirm it. The stern is the back. The bow is the front. And they prayed for day to come. Now, that sounds like they were asking God to let day come sooner than... I mean, if this happened about midnight or just deep into the night, then they prayed for day to come. Now, day's going to come whether you pray for it or not. But if you pray for day to come, does that mean you want day to come sooner? Or does it mean you're just praying for safety until the day comes? I mean, it sounds like they're praying for day to come sooner to me. Which, I guess we can make the point, you can ask God to do anything. Whether or not he does it is up to him. But he has the power to do anything. If he wanted the day to come sooner, he could have made it come sooner. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea, well, maybe that does mean a flat-bottom boat. Maybe that's the little boat that's up on the big boat that you can let down and I guess travel around near land easier. They let the skiff into the sea under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow. Now, I looked this up. The prow and the bow are essentially the same thing. The prow is the part of the front of the ship that sticks up out of the water. You know, where the pirates would put their mermaids on the front. The bow is the front, maybe part that's under the water. But the prow and bow are the front of the boat. Prow is out of the water. Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall off. So yeah, I think that's the little boat, the little flat-bottom boat that they would let down into the water off the big ship. And as day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, Today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food and eaten nothing. Now, I don't think anybody was fasting for a Jewish feast day. I think they were fasting because they were fighting for their lives and maybe praying that God would save them. Therefore, I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival. since not a hair will fall from your head, the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. So this is also not some Jewish ritual, not even a Christian ritual. This is just deciding to eat food after many days of not eating food. Then they were all encouraged and also took food for themselves. And in all, we were 266 persons on the ship. So that's a lot of people on a ship. That's why it had to be a big ship to hold 266 persons. And it had a little a skiff that you could let down into the water, which is a little boat. I just envision it like the big wooden pirate ships, like the Black Pearl, if you've seen what's the name of that? The Pirates of the Caribbean. So when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and threw out the wheat into the sea. So that's interesting. I mean, they threw away the future source of food after they had eaten, one day after not eating for 14 days. So if they did not So, anyway, they threw away their future source of food, so they were going to have to fast again for however long it took to reach safety. But I guess they thought that they were on the verge of safety since they were 15 fathoms from some land anyway. When it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed, so they didn't even know where they were. They just knew that there was some land there. And that when daytime came, they didn't know, they could see the land, but they didn't know where it was. They observed a bay with a beach, onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let go the anchors and left them in the sea. Now I wonder why they didn't pull the anchors back up on the ship. I guess because they're lightening their load. They're on the verge of death and the verge of losing the ship and everything else. They're like, whatever, we're not going to need any anchors from here. So they don't have any food. They don't have any anchors. They don't have a skiff. And they've thrown away everything they could off the ship. Meanwhile, loosing the rudder ropes, and they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. I don't know what it means to loose the rudder ropes. Now, are the rudder ropes the ones that actually tell the rudders which way to turn? If so, then they're saying, you know what, I'm just going to let the wind guide us. But they want to go to a specific place, so they would need the rudder ropes. So I don't know why they would loose the rudder ropes. They hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. But striking a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. Now I think that means, since the prow is the part of the front of the ship that sticks up out of the water, it sounds like they ran straight into some large rocks and stuck the nose of the ship in between two large rocks, and then the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. So the front was stuck between rocks and the back was being torn apart by the waves. And the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners lest any of them should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest, some on board, some on parts of the ship, and it was that they all escaped safely to land. So that's just as Paul's vision of the angel gave him said they were going to lose the ship, but everybody's life would be saved. Even when the soldiers wanted to kill all the prisoners, God's plan overrode their plan. The centurion said, we're not killing anybody, because the centurion wanted to save Paul. Now, why did he have an attachment to Paul? Maybe because Paul had been talking about his God in the prophecy that he had made concerning him. Maybe it had to do with the report that Festus had given Julius, the centurion. But anyway, he liked Paul. The centurion liked Paul and wanted to save him. Probably because God ensured that that was the case. But anyway, that completes Acts 27. Please post your comments below. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so we can study together.